Welcome to this congregation. This is the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Lower Bucks, otherwise known as UUFLB, and we welcome you. I'm Sherry Christenberry, your lay leader today. Thank you for choosing to worship with us. Our UU community is built on love, acceptance, connection for all who enter our space. We hope that today's message will help you on your journey, your personal journey and your spiritual journey. We invite you to relax, sit back, and enjoy this time together. For the month of October, our theme has been hospitality. Our UUA, which is the Unitarian Universalist Association, of which we are a part, our UUA covenant states, hospitality emerged as an ancient obligation grounded in reciprocity. It is an act of love that cannot exist in hate's shadow. Hospitality's ability to overcome barriers by welcoming the stranger elicits a willingness to support the common good. And you might remember, supporting the common good is our annual theme with Touchstones this year. Today's speaker is the Reverend Libby Smith. Reverend Libby really needs no introduction, since we had the honor of her service as our full-time minister from 2007 to 2013. Now retired, she is still periodically able to provide wonderful sermons for us. And her sermon title today is Hospitality of Listening. Henri Nouwen, the 20th century Dutch theologian, writer, and priest, described listening as spiritual hospitality, a way of welcoming people into our very beings. Drawing on his wisdom, we will explore the art of listening as a form of hospitality that allows others to feel known, valued, and accepted. We'll begin our service with a musical prelude from the one and only Avi Wisnia, our musician extraordinaire, our award-winning musician, our favorite musician.
Thank you. Well, I'll take some of that credit, but I can't take credit for the song that I'm about to sing. That actually goes to Marlo Thomas and a project that she works on in the 70s. A project that was so influential and culturally significant that it was entered into the Library of Congress just a few years ago. And which is why it's still relevant today, especially as we talk about hospitality, seeing people for who they are, listening to people, and recognizing people for who they are, and welcoming everyone with open arms. And while that may not be a reality that always happens, it's something worth working towards and striving towards. And that is the message of free to be you and me. So wherever you are today, whether you're in this room or on this Zoom with us, feel free to sing along. There's a land that I see where the people are free, and I say it ain't far to this land from where we are. Take my hand, come with me, where all people are free. Come with me, take my hand, and we'll live in a land where the river runs free, in a land through the green country, in a land to the shining sea. And you and me are free to be you and me. I see a land bright and clear, and the time's coming near when we'll live in this land, you and me, hand in hand. Take my hand, come along, lend your voice to my song. Come along, take my hand, sing a song. For a land where the river runs free, for a land through the green country, for a land to a shining sea, for a land where the horses run free. You and me are free to be you and me.
Love that song. Thank you. I would like to invite Gil Christenberry up to light the chalice while I read our opening words. Symbol of light and knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom, we light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. Thank you. And now one of our favorite parts of the service is the message for all ages, and Libby has a wonderful book to share with us.
I do. I was so excited when I found this book, which only happened yesterday, so I'm not as practiced as I might have been. More about that in the sermon. This is a book called The Rabbit Listened by Corey Dorfeld. And I'm going to be holding up the pictures and hoping you can see enough. You know, you'll understand the story even without the pictures, but the pictures do add to it. One day, Taylor decided to build something. Something new. Something special. Something amazing. And Taylor was so proud. But then, out of nowhere, things came crashing down. You ever had that feeling? Can we all relate to that? The chicken was the first to notice. Cluck, cluck, cluck! What a shame! I'm so sorry this happened. Let's talk about it. Cluck, cluck, cluck! But Taylor didn't feel like talking. So the chicken left. Next came the bear. Grrr, rawr. Oh, I bet you feel so angry. Ooh, let's shout about it. Grrr, arr, roar. But Taylor didn't feel like shouting, so the bear left. The elephant knew just what to do. I can fix this. We just need to remember exactly how things were. But Taylor didn't feel like remembering. So the elephant left. One by one they came. The hyena, hee hee, let's laugh about it. The ostrich, let's hide and pretend it didn't happen. The kangaroo, tisk, tisk, what a mess. Let's just throw it all away. And the snake, let's go down and knock down somebody else's. But Taylor didn't feel like doing anything with anybody. So eventually they all left until Taylor was all alone. In the quiet, Taylor didn't even notice the rabbit. But it moved closer and closer until Taylor could feel its warm body. Together they sat in silence until Taylor said, "Please stay with me." The rabbit listened. The rabbit listened as Taylor talked. The rabbit listened as Taylor shouted. The rabbit listened as Taylor remembered and laughed. The rabbit listened to Taylor's plans to hide, to throw everything away, to ruin things for somebody else. Through it all, the rabbit never left. And when the time was right, the rabbit listened to Taylor's plan to build it all again. "I can't wait," said Taylor. "It's going to be amazing." let's sing together as we invite our young people to leave for their religious education. Peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere you This morning's reading comes from the 20th century Dutch theologian, writer, and priest Henri Nouwen. And this is from his book, Bread for the Journey, a day book of wisdom and faith. Listening is much more than allowing another to talk while waiting for a chance to respond. Listening is paying full attention to others and welcoming them into our very beings. The beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their own words more seriously, and discovering their own true selves. Listening is a form of spiritual hospitality by which you invite strangers to become friends, to get to know their inner selves more fully, and even to dare to be silent with you.
Our October split plate recipient is Welcoming the Stranger. This nonprofit offers free classes in English as a second language and computer skills. Plus, they also offer the United States Citizenship Exam Prep for adult immigrants and refugees in the greater Philadelphia area. What could be more hospitable than to give immigrants an opportunity to be part of the American experience and help them along the way? Please be generous. Donations have been given and received with love and gratitude. Thank you. And now Avi has our interlude.
When you're weary and feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I will dry them all. I'm on your side. When times get rough and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled waters, I will lay me down. Like a bridge over troubled waters, I will lay me down.
Now I welcome back Reverend Libby with her sermon.
One of the things I ended up missing the most during these pandemic times, and in our household we still feel like we're in pandemic times because of my husband's medical vulnerabilities. I was surprised to find that one of the things I found myself missing the most was the opportunity to offer hospitality. Now, I was surprised because John and I were never big party throwers. We weren't even particularly comfortable just having another couple over to dinner. Neither of us are particularly socially confident. Neither of us grew up in households that ever had anybody over. So we just we've never quite known how to do it, you know? So it always felt like a big deal with a lot of stress and anxiety. So you'd think it would be great not to have to do that. But for 10 years, I hosted a graduate school reunion with a group of my closest friends from divinity school. It started as a whim. See, when we were in graduate school, there were 3 of us who shared an apartment who were close to the same age. There was 1 month every year when we were all the same age before Steve turned the next age. And so during the month that we were all 29, we had a pushing 30 party. So 20 years later, I had this idea that we should get the old gang back together and have a pushing 50 party. And by the time we actually pulled it together, most of us had already turned 51, but the thought was still there. And the group had expanded beyond the original 3 housemates to include several other friends, several partners, and 1 couple's 2 young teenage daughters. But we finally actually gathered. And what a joy it was to spend a long weekend together laughing and talking and cooking and drinking and eating and singing together. And since John and I have the largest and most central home out of the bunch, we were the obvious place for folks to gather. Now, having 7 extra people in the house for 3 full days, all fairly intense people, has its challenges. There was one year when John found me sobbing in our bedroom on the 3rd floor. He said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "They're all the people I love most in the world and I wish they would go away." But that feeling passed. And mostly it was just joy to be together, to catch up on the past year. The guitars would come out, the wine would come out, the laughter would rain. And we did this for 10 consecutive years. The young teenagers who we thought would be off in the corner on their phones were right there in the gathering, part of the conversation, calling out requests for the singing from the very first year. We did it for 10 consecutive years. The preteen daughters became young adults, wanted to bring their partners. "Can I bring Joey? We don't mind sleeping somewhere weird," which turned out to be a very poor quality mattress on the dining room floor, which got hauled out during meal times. So then it was 9 extra people in the house for 3 full days, and still a joy, and we all looked forward to it all year. And one year I began to worry that it was getting to be too much for my husband, who is a fairly withdrawn, quiet type of guy. And I was considering asking him if we should stop doing it. I was afraid he was feeling just too inundated. But the year I was planning to ask him that, after everyone left, he watched the final car full of tearful, departing friends leave, turned to me and said, "This is a really important thing you do for your friends. You have to keep it up." Well, we managed to squeeze in that 10th annual in 2020 because we always hold the reunion in January. The shutdown didn't hit till March. And then everything changed. And we've missed the past 3 years. This past year, we almost gave it a try, but the COVID numbers started going up again. And in fact, the weekend we would have met, 2 of our friends had COVID. Now, a Zoom reunion is better than nothing. And we would get on Zoom and stay on Zoom with people going in and out for 8 hours straight. But you can't sing together on Zoom. And you can't cook together. And given the medical vulnerabilities that we're still wrestling with in our household, this year even is still looking iffy, although we are cautiously optimistic maybe we can do it. Now, I knew I was going to miss seeing all my friends, but the loss of this time together has been like a punch in the gut to me. And I hadn't realized how much of my sense of self was tied up with this reunion, not just the maintaining and celebrating the relationships, although that was big, but the tangible act of providing the hospitality had become incredibly important to me. Cleaning the house, making sure everybody had an actual bed, even if some of them were in weird locations. Shopping for the food. They do all the cooking because they love to cook, but I would load up the house with everything they were going to need beforehand. Making sure everybody had fresh towels, just doing everything I could to prepare to receive my dear ones into my home. And as a person who has often felt over the years that I receive in this group of friends far more than I give, it felt like a very life-giving way to give back to my little core community who are scattered all over the country most of the year. So providing hospitality had become an important part of my sense of self and my identity in that group of friends. Symbolic of the best of me. And so it was a huge loss. So when I stumbled over Henri Nouwen's quotation about listening as an act of hospitality, it grabbed my attention. Because listening is something I can still do, whether I can open my home or not. And I hope something I can learn to do better. And Nouwen makes it sound like it's potentially even more powerful than the kind of tangible hospitality I'd been thinking about. Listening, he says, is paying full attention to others and welcoming them into our very beings. Not just inviting someone into your home, but into your very self. That's a powerful concept. And then he goes on to say, the beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their words more seriously, and discovering their own true selves. Listening is a form of spiritual hospitality by which you invite strangers to become friends, to get to know their inner selves more fully, and even to dare to be silent with you. We begin to discover more of our true selves when someone really listens to us, takes us seriously, accepts us. Sometimes we don't even realize that what we need is someone to listen. We may not even realize we have anything we're trying to say. But the active listening of another person can draw us out, open up a space where we can be heard and understood and accepted. I first encountered the power of this way of listening when I encountered feminist theology during my divinity school years. And there's a phrase that became a touchstone among feminist theologians, especially those who were struggling to combat racism as well as sexism as they did the work of theology. It came from the work of Nell Morton, who was a mid-20th century American theologian, professor, feminist activist, and civil rights leader. She spoke of the power of hearing each other into speech. Hearing each other into speech. She was recognizing that until an intentional listening space existed, many voices would never be heard. That they wouldn't be heard until they were listened for. So she was intentional about making space for women's voices in theological conversation, creating an environment that allowed those voices to emerge and to be heard and understood and valued in theology, but also in the wider culture. Now, that was a radical thing to do in mid-century theology work, to create that space for women's voices and especially for Black and brown women's voices, to welcome them into the conversation, to center them in the conversation rather than keeping them on the margins. And so this concept of hearing someone into speech has a particular significance and power in the context that Nell Morton was using it. But I think the same idea can be carried into our day-to-day lives in countless contexts. Because sometimes we really don't even know how to begin speaking until someone really starts to listen, opens up the space for our thoughts to emerge. And then that listening ear, that space that's created, gives us the freedom to find our voice, to figure out what we need to say, and to emerge more fully. So I was really excited when I found this morning's story. You have to understand I was especially excited because until about the middle of the afternoon yesterday, I had planned to use a different story. And then I suddenly realized it simply was not going to work. And there I was on Saturday, relatively late afternoon, going, oops, I'm supposed to do a story tomorrow and I don't have one that's going to work. So I got on my computer and I did a little search for stories about listening. I found this wonderful webpage that lists children's books on all different themes. And as I read the descriptions, I thought, that's the one I need. And Barnes & Noble had it in stock. Down to Barnes & Noble I went to get my book. The protagonist in the story, Taylor, wasn't sure just what they needed when their glorious construction fell apart. Did they need to cry, to rage, to hide, to get revenge, to start over? All of Taylor's friends came by wanting to help. And I think they had good intentions, but they weren't paying attention to what Taylor needed. They were expressing what they would have needed under those circumstances and assuming that Taylor would find it helpful. They weren't listening to Taylor. And then came Rabbit. Rabbit was the only one who left an open space for Taylor to emerge. Rabbit just came and sat in silence, close enough that Taylor could feel its warm body. I am here for you. No words necessary. Rabbit listened before Taylor began to speak. And that's what allowed Taylor to speak. That opened up the space for Taylor to think through what they really needed to express. And when Taylor had the chance to be heard, to work through all of the emotions, then Taylor was ready to start again and create something amazing. Now, I know that we're talking on two different levels. When we talk about a child's building blocks and when we talk about patriarchy and racism and sexism. Right? These are not equal issues in life. But there is a way in which they are intimately connected because they are both concerned with honoring the lived experience of people's lives, the very real struggles and disappointments and triumphs that we all experience to one degree or another. Now, another 20th century social ethicist and theologian who was almost certainly influenced by Nell Morton named Mary Pellauer. And she wrote, "If there is anything worth calling theology, it is listening to people's stories. Listening to them and honoring them and cherishing them and asking them to become even more brightly beautiful than they already are. Listening to people's stories. That is an act of radical hospitality, especially the stories of people we may think we don't like, or don't agree with, or don't approve of. In my little Mennonite church, we have relatively recently, within the last 5 years or so, gone through a significant process to reach the decision to become fully open and affirming to gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender folks. This is not a no-brainer among Mennonites. It took a lot of work, took a lot of listening, and one of the things that helped most was a study guide that someone had compiled that was comprised of real-life stories of real-life people describing their experience in the church. The author's preface, and I regret that I could not find my copy to be more specific about who had put this together, who the author and editors were. But they pointed out that when someone presents an argument on a controversial topic, our tendency is to listen to that argument with the intention of rebutting it. We're ready to give our argument. But when someone tells us their story, our impulse is to try to understand the story. It's a completely different dynamic. So listening to people's stories, you may or may not end up agreeing with them, but listening to the story, hearing the experience, is a powerful act. Many years ago, I attended a workshop at Kirkridge Retreat Center with the amazing Quaker educator and activist Parker Palmer. It was focused on finding and embracing our own giftedness, which is just an incredibly, it felt at the time to me, I was quite new in ministry and not feeling remotely gifted, and wasn't at all sure I even had the right to go to this retreat, because who was I to think I might find any gifts at all? But I went, and it was absolutely transformative. And one of the exercises that Parker had us do was to form groups of 3 and to listen to each other's stories. And if I remember correctly, the stories were to be specifically about something in our life that we were struggling with, something really difficult. And each person had the chance to share deeply for some set amount of time, while the other 2 people only listened. No questions, no comments, just listened. And then, when there was a chance for them to reflect back, their job was to reflect back to the speaker the gifts they had perceived in that person's sharing. Now, most of the time, if I'm talking with someone about something, especially something that I'm really struggling with, I'm not expecting them to come back at me with the gifts they perceive in my story. I'm expecting them maybe to critique me, or to analyze the situation, make suggestions, help, try to fix the situation. They mean well, like the animals in the story. They meant well. They wanted to fix things. But as Parker Palmer reminded us that week, and it's a sentence that has stayed in my head forever, he said, "People want to fix you, but nobody wants to be fixed. They just want to be heard." As we took our turns in our little groups of 3, speaking and listening and reflecting, a remarkable level of intimacy developed. It is a rare and astonishing thing to pour out your heart to people, in this case relative strangers we had only met that week, whose sole purpose is to listen for the gifts of you that are hidden in the speech that you share. It is equally powerful to listen to someone else with the same purpose, not to figure out how you can fix their problem, but how you can identify the gifts that they bring. So often we listen with one ear while we're preparing our response or our rebuttal or our suggestion. But listening for the simple purpose of affirming is very freeing and very beautiful. Like Taylor with the building blocks, we've all had moments when something collapsed in our lives. Something amazing just disintegrated, and we needed to talk about it. I have a very, very dear friend who is quick to try to solve my problems. She's one of my oldest and dearest friends for many, many good reasons. But it's very hard for her to listen without trying to fix. She's just wired that way. And early in our friendship, it created a lot of stress. I think I may have shared a story here once about talking to her about something that was just so hard for me, and she kept saying, "Well, have you thought about this, or have you tried that?" And finally her husband broke in and said, honey, I think what Libby needs you to say is, "Aw." We've learned to laugh about it together, and now she has learned to hear me out and then say, "Do you want me to help problem solve here, or do you want me to just sit with you?" And it's amazing to me that she has been willing to learn to do that. because she is so programmed to want to fix things. It's hard for her to do that, but she is willing to do that for me. And sometimes I do want her to help me problem solve and think things through because she's really, really good at it. And other times I ask her to just be with me in the struggle and listen as I try to work it through myself. Henri Nouwen, who I quoted for our reading, has a lot to say about hospitality in a lot of different contexts. He had worked closely with Jean Vanier, who is the man who started the L'Arche communities in France, which is a residential community where people with various kinds of developmental disabilities live alongside of and in equality with people without those kinds of disabilities and build community together. He was quite inspired by that and got involved in a community like that in Canada. And in his book, Reaching Out, The Three Movements of the Spiritual Life, he wrote, "Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. It's not to bring men and women over to our side, but to offer freedom not disturbed by dividing lines." Now, he wasn't specifically talking about listening in that example of hospitality, but it still applies. We listen not to change people, but to understand them. And it's in that open space of listening that growth and change can occur, perhaps for both parties. Now, my original thought for the story for this morning was Horton Hears a Who by Dr. Seuss. I'm sure some of you at least are familiar with this wonderful tale, but there was just no way to trim it down to a reasonable length that was going to get the point across. But if you know the story, you know that the entire infinitesimal city of Whoville is small enough to exist on a speck of dust on a clover blossom. So we've got a clover blossom with a speck of dust, and within that speck of dust is an entire city. And this city is saved from destruction because Horton the elephant, who of course has very large ears and very keen hearing, happened to listen and heard voices calling from this speck, "We are here, we are here, we are here, we are here." And Horton was determined to save them because a person's a person, no matter how small. But the other animals can't hear the whoos down in Whoville, and they all think Horton is crazy, and they're going to lock him up, and it's actually really sort of horrific. They're going to torture him, and they're going to boil the speck in boiling oil, and it gets very scary. I can't imagine as a little kid why I wasn't terrified of this book, except that it comes out okay. Because Horton is so determined and so persistent, and he gets every who down in Whoville making some kind of noise until finally that last tiny little kid who was hiding in a room somewhere and didn't know what was going on adds his voice, and it breaks through, and everybody can hear it. And Whoville is saved. But it took Horton willing to listen, insisting that other people listen, because he believed that a person's a person no matter how small and had the right to grow and flourish and survive. So as we think about listening as an act of hospitality, we can begin with the people we already know and care about. I always encourage us to practice by starting with the easier steps. We can pay more attention to our partners, to our children, to our families, to our friends, our coworkers. We can provide the kind of listening that assures that, quote, those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their words more seriously and discovering their own true selves. And in the process, we create a space where understanding can flourish and change can take place. And then we can extend our reach. What voices are not being heard now? Who might need to be heard into speech? And how can we leave space for that to happen? It begins with listening, with inviting the stories and seeking to hear and understand rather than to fix or change. So I'll leave you again with those words from Mary Pellauer. If there is anything worth calling theology, it is listening to people's stories, listening to them and honoring them and cherishing them and asking them to become even more brightly beautiful than they already are. So may we all become theologians, providing spiritual hospitality by listening to and honoring and cherishing those stories.
Thank you, Libby. Now is the time in our service when we recognize and lift up one another in love. Please come forward to this microphone and share your joy or sorrow. Laura. Just say it. You want to come up, or you can just say it from there? Okay. "101 years old this week." Oh. Oh, nice. Oh, thank you, Laura. 101. Just another 20 or 30 years to go. Are there any other joys or sorrows? Sure.
I struggled with whether or not to try to find a way to draw what's happening in Israel-Palestine into my sermon, and decided there was no way that I could do it justice because of the depth and complexity of the issues and the immensity of the horror. But I just need to name it, to lift it up, and to remember that so many of the people there just want to find a way to live together in peace. And the folks with power are not ready. That's my own very personal take on it. There are many ways to understand the situation. It goes back so many centuries and is so complicated. But my heart has just been breaking ever since the war began, and I just felt the need to name it among people I love.
Just in recognition of Libby's stories, or Libby's sermon, this past Friday, I attended a small group ministry session at Shenandoah, which is led by someone from the mainline Unitarian Church. And much of our small group ministry, which comes from Soul Matters and is used at mainline as well, where she also runs a group there, and then she comes and runs a group at our place, has to do with telling your stories. And this past week, it was just absolutely wonderful, all the stories that we heard of the people that we live with, and just how you get to know everybody a lot better when you hear their stories. I wish I could be here to do the same group for all of you, but it's just too much. Thank you.
Any other joys or sorrows? Whether or not you shared today, for your joys, we in this community join you in celebration. For any sorrows or concerns, may you feel our sympathy and compassion. Please join me in singing Spirit of Life, which is up on the screen.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Now, I'd like you to join me in a prayer from the Reverend Daniel Chesney Cantor. It's up on the screen. We'll read it together. To love life is to notice the wonders that abound, and to notice the wonders that abound is to be grounded here and now, and to be grounded here and now is the beginning of finding love for this life today. Let us ground ourselves in this instant in the worship of all things good and right. And now please stand if you're able for our closing song, hymn number 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. Then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
I'll extinguish the chalice to words from Reverend Krista Tavez. It is our work, shared with each other in covenant, that creates and sustains this beloved community. We extinguish this chalice, but its light lives on in the directions we have chosen today. The light of this faith lives on in us together, in our hearts, our minds, bodies, and spirits. Our service is concluded. For those of you on Zoom, thank you again for joining us, and we hope you'll be with us again next week. I'd like to thank Reverend Libby Smith for a wonderful sermon. It really touched me today. And for all who are here, please join me in the cafeteria for coffee, fellowship, conversation, and a wonderful chili lunch provided by our hospitality team in our hospitality month. So join me in the cafeteria. Go now in peace. Amen and blessed be.